Wow, so this story has absolutely exploded since the last time we talked about it, expanding into a $1 million donation that we didn't know about before, as well as the Prime Minister backing up his member of parliament that was just accused of being part of a network of agents involved in election interference supported by China. If you haven't been following this story or the streams that we've been doing on the channel, I'm going to give you a brief overview that's going to get you fully up to date with this situation. And then if you have been watching these streams, there's a lot of new information that we need to add, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. Here we go.
Global News can reveal new allegations emerging from an ongoing probe by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Intelligence sources tell Global News that investigators have been tracking current Ontario Liberal MP Han Dong since the summer of 2019. And those sources say he is one of 11 Toronto area riding candidates believed to be supported by Beijing in the lead up to that year's federal election and alleged to be an affiliate in China's election interference networks.
According to my sources, CSIS started tracking this member of parliament, Han Dong, a former Ontario member of provincial parliament, in summer of 2019. These CSIS investigators would later allege that Chinese Canadian seniors and students were bussed into the riding, and students were told that they had to vote for a certain candidate to keep their student visas. So we have the consulate telling these individuals, you have to go here to this riding and vote in this way, otherwise your student visa that your parents have paid so much for you to come here and study in Canada, in order to continue going here, you got to go here and you got to vote for this individual in this sort of primary election determining the Liberal nomination. CSIS reporting indicates that during a political party nomination vote prior to the 2019 general election in Canada, 2 busloads of Chinese Canadian seniors were brought in to support a specific candidate. International students were also transported in to support the same candidate. The students were given letters that provided them with an address in the specific riding, thereby enabling them to participate in the nomination vote. Wow, I don't think I clocked that the first time I read this. Okay, so we have people that potentially do not live in that riding being bussed into that riding with what it seems like they're saying here, allegedly counterfeit letters that are sent to this individual to a certain address. So they have their name tied to a certain address, which is inside of that riding. Even though they don't live in that riding, they have a piece of mail, which is one of the things that you can use to say, hey, I can vote in this. Your information must be wrong. Look at this letter that was addressed to me at my home address, right? This is what they're using as proof of saying, like, I can vote in this primary election, this nomination election, right? That is wild. Because what are the implications of that? You're saying that maybe this doesn't happen just once, using the people that actually do live in the riding and trying to influence that. Instead, by providing these counterfeit letters, you can essentially have the same people move around and vote in multiple different primary election sort of campaigns here. Go around and vote to figure out who the MP support, like who the Liberal nominee or Conservative or NDP, right? Like this instance is talking about Liberals, but they're saying that essentially you could move these people around to vote in the primary election of who's going to be representing that riding. And they could do it over and over again because they have multiple letters. This is wild. Individuals who are not Canadian citizens and therefore cannot vote in elections at any level of government in Canada can still legally vote in a party nomination process as long as they are party members. So this is what they're saying is like, you don't have to be a Canadian citizen to vote on what your preference is for the member of parliament who will then be voted in, right? So if you can vote and say, I want this Liberal candidate instead of this Liberal candidate. I want this Conservative candidate instead of this Conservative candidate. You don't have to be a Canadian citizen to vote in these type of primary, if we're going to steal language from how the States describes it, these types of primary elections. So that's where they're saying there's a weakness here, a vulnerability. It adds gaining a party's nomination in a riding that has long supported that party is akin to winning the subsequent election, and state actors exploit this loophole to engage in foreign interference that targets specific candidates in particular electoral ridings. So we have two individuals here. First, Han Dong, who is the current member of parliament for Don Valley North, the one that all of these allegations are about. And then the other individual that we're talking about is Michael Chan, the former Ontario member of provincial parliament that at least Global News is saying the Liberals may not want to talk about it in too much depth because of the amount of fundraising he does for the Liberal Party. Here's some comments they had specifically about these allegations made by both the Globe and Mail and Global News, of course, saying, hey, these allegations are ridiculous, they're not true, and it seems like that Trudeau has backed them up on this, which we'll get into in a minute. Dong strongly denies these allegations. This is the exact quote from him. As a member of Parliament, safeguarding Canada's democratic institutions is a fundamental part of my job, and I take all serious allegations of foreign interference very seriously. Mr. Chen vehemently denies all allegations that he is an agent of Beijing involved in federal election interference. I learned, though, that CSIS has been watching Chan for over a decade. Over 10 years, CSIS has been watching Chan, even taking interest in his expansive mansion in Markham. And here's an image of it that Sam Cooper was able to get. I wasn't able to find any more images of this mansion in Markham, but this apparently CSIS is interested in this mansion specifically. Not too many more details on this. And now we've got to get into the newest information. Right now, there's essentially 3 different positions that the current political parties in Canada are taking on this issue. One, the Liberal Party is saying, hey, we put together a panel of officials, of top government agents, as well as security officials, a bipartisan group, and they study these elections, and they found that, well, both of these elections were free and fair, so we should just trust in that. We don't need to do anything else to dig deeper into this issue. Second, the Conservatives say, hey, we need to dig a lot deeper into this, and we want to do so in House of Commons committee meetings. The only problem with that is that those tend to be sort of partisan areas where you can have sort of conservatives versus liberals, or these kinds of narratives of just trying to score political points. So the committee meetings, some people are questioning whether that's a good place to actually go into a lot of depth, but the Conservatives are saying we need more documents in these committee meetings, less redacted documents, so that we can actually get to the bottom of this. And third, which I found the most interesting, is the NDP's current stance on this, and I think that they're seeing an opportunity here to distance themselves from the Liberals and actually gain more support, because they're the only party right now that is calling for a full public inquiry, an open inquiry, sort of noting the importance of this issue, because we need to make sure that Canadians still believe in the integrity of our elections moving forward, so we need to do whatever we can to make things extremely transparent. So the NDP definitely separating themselves from the other 2 political parties, calling for this major public inquiry into the whole matter to convince Canadians that, yeah, everything actually is okay, and taking it out of the partisan committee meetings. So I found that super interesting. But we need to get to Trudeau's response here. I want to show you a clip here. It's a brief clip, but in this clip, he actually mentions a name that we weren't talking about before that has led to even more major concerns. And this story actually just broke this morning.
Canadians had already seen, from challenges to democracies like France or the United States, the role that foreign interference was potentially playing, and a potential threat to our democracies. That's why in Canada in early 2019 we stood up both an intelligence task force and a high-level panel consisting of top public servants to be able to ensure that the integrity of our elections is not compromised by foreign interference. Good news, obviously, is that they determined that both in the 2019 and the 2021 elections, our election integrity held. That doesn't mean that we are not faced on an ongoing basis by attempts at interference in our democracy. We're continually improving and learning how to better keep Canadians safe and to keep our democracy safe. After the 2019 election, which was the first time we stood up the panel, there were a number of recommendations that we moved forward on. And after the 2021 election, there was another report, this one written by Morris Rosenberg, that has been released to both the government and to the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, and I'm hoping that they're going to be launching a study on how best we can protect our democracy in the coming months.
So the Prime Minister here is sticking with the language he's traditionally used to talk about this issue, saying, hey, yes, we know that there is interference in Canada, but we stood up an official panel and said, make sure that there's no interference, and that panel came back to us and said there was no interference. And there have been reports from the 2019 election. We've taken that information and we've made changes to make sure there's less interference. And for the 2021 election, we actually got someone to write an independent report on how we could change things to make them better. better based on the information from the 2021 election. But the interesting thing here is the name of the person that he gives that actually wrote this study that was then sent to security officials as well as the government, talking about how they could make this change. And that name is Morris Rosenberg, someone we weren't talking about before, but now, as of this morning, is making waves with a whole other story related to this. This was published early this morning, about 6 hours ago, and it's from the Globe and Mail. They don't reveal their source as to where they're getting this information from, as of course they can't because they might be persecuted because of the Security of Information Act, but let me explain exactly what happened here. The story revolves around Zhang Bin, who is a Chinese billionaire that donated $1 million to the Trudeau Foundation back in 2016. This, of course, is the foundation that was set up in the honor of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, not Justin Trudeau. And of this $1 million, apparently $200,000 went directly to that foundation, while $50,000 was used to pay for a statue of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and the remaining $750,000 went to the University of Montreal for the Faculty of Law to fund scholarships, as well as scholarships that allow Quebec students to visit China. Now, for this $200,000 donation that came in back in 2016, Mr. Rosenberg, this is the new name that we're talking about, and we'll get into more detail there, was the chief executive of the Trudeau Foundation, according to the Globe and Mail's report, and sort of facilitated this $200,000 donation from Zhang to the Trudeau Foundation. That kind of stuff wasn't enough. This is where it actually gets wild, because according to this source from the Globe and Mail, CSIS has information and reason to believe that an unnamed commercial attaché of one of China's consulates in Canada had one of the people at a consulate in Canada had a conversation with Zhang Bin, the person who donated this $1 million, and specifically that conversation was about the official from the consulate telling Zhang that the Chinese government would reimburse him for the entire donation. Now, this all becomes even more interesting when you take a look at the billions of dollars that have been poured into the United Front Work Department, a sort of Chinese agency that's goal is to promote positive Chinese relations and Chinese interests across the world at large, billions of dollars going into this, and then now we have this report that the $1 million donation that went to the Trudeau Foundation may have been reimbursed by the government here, the Chinese government, making you wonder, okay, maybe this is a part of this United Front funding. So again, based on all of this reporting, Morris Rosenberg, the person who was the sort of head of the Trudeau Foundation during when this donation actually happened, we've got this person here, and this is the same person that Trudeau just today or yesterday said we got him to write a report about how we can take what we learned during the 2020 elections, the potential interference, how we can take that information and apply it so that we have less interference in the future. Now, there's not necessarily any specific wrongdoing here, but people are concerned about having an individual who clearly has a tight relationship in order to facilitate a donation of this amount, also being the same person that's writing a report about how we can make sure there's less interference from foreign agents, right? You can kind of draw the connections that may or may not be there, but it makes people concerned at the very least. And at the end of the day, I don't know what specifically happened with all of this. I think nobody does specifically, nobody in the public at least, which is why I think it's important for us to push towards some sort of public inquiry here, like the NDP are honestly doing right now, saying we need a public inquiry here, because if the public of Canada, the Canadian citizens, don't have as much faith in the institution that is their election, well, we can see how there are major problems with that going forward, and sort of what has happened in the States and the sort of denial of the validity of those elections. And I think that this is ultimately likely the goal of any foreign agents. It's not specifically to say we want this one person in power because they're going to benefit us. Maybe that's one part of it. But another major goal of foreign agents and foreign entities is to make sure that in Canada we have less faith in our institutions. And when you're dealing with all of this internal strife because nobody trusts one another, you can't as effectively make decisions that make your nation strong collectively, and I think ultimately that's the goal here. Of course, if there were a public inquiry, we'd have to then trust the findings of that public inquiry. Hopefully, we would get more information about what actually went down here, what actually happened with all of this stuff. But ultimately, there's going to be information that can't be unredacted because of national security, right? So at the end of the day, even if there's a public inquiry, we as Canadians would have to choose to trust the results of that public inquiry, which at this point isn't necessarily a given. And at this point, I still think that this entire story is being underreported in Canada, and most people can't wrap their heads around what exactly has gone on here and the severity of these allegations. So I appreciate you sharing this video with your friends and liking and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already done so. I do live streams a couple times a week going over stories like this in way more depth. You got some of those clips earlier, so I'd love for you to be there live. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you can find out when I'm going live, at the point when I start going live. But with all of that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody. Really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.